Rashi cites the Chazal that although Korach was a smart man, wise, accomplished, nevertheless, somehow getting involved in a situation where literally it was a no-win situation because the litmus test, which was going to determine who was qualified to be the Kohen Gadol, was the story with the fire pan with the incense. And he told them all to take the fire pan, the incense. So there were 250 people who are qualified to be leaders of the Sanhedrin, together with Korach, and only one was going to survive. So what's the chance that you could be the one? So Rashi cites Eidoli Toso. His eye misled him because he had seen that Shmuel Bar Novik, who was the equivalent of Moshe Aaron in terms of his spiritual standing, was going to descend from him. So he says, how's it possible if I'm going to perish and I'm not going to be the survivor? There is no Shmuel. So evidently I'm the lone survivor. That's why Korach was convinced that his position is correct, and somehow Moshe is misleading all the people. So Chazal tell us that the reason why, I mentioned this the other day, that Korach's understanding was incorrect because at the last moment, his two sons did tshuva. And because they did tshuva, they did not perish together with Korach and his community. So Shmuel descended from one of these two sons. Therefore, it's Eino Hitoso. His eye misled him. But the Midrash tells us, as I mentioned, that when Moshe, right before it happened, he came to try to convince Korach that his behavior was unacceptable and his position was baseless, Korach would not speak to him. Why? He said, I'm not going to enter into dialogue with Moshe because Moshe will win the argument. And I don't want to get involved in a situation where he wins the argument. So therefore, I will not respond. It's like a person says, I know I'm right. Even if you prove me wrong, I know I'm right. That's how convinced Korach was. You're going to outsmart me. And I don't want to be convinced that I'm wrong. Korach's two sons, one was sitting at each side of him. They see Moshe entering into the tent. As I mentioned, they had a quandary, a dilemma here. Should they stand for Moshe and acknowledge Moshe for who he was, although it'll be a slight to their father, or what? Or they'll sit. They decided they're going to stand. And because they stood, they merited to have Hirurei Tshuva. They merited to have stirrings of Tshuva, and because of those stirrings, they did not go along with their father because of the stirrings of Tshuva, and therefore they survived. But what do you see from the Medrash? You see from the Medrash that when a person crosses certain lines, literally, you're at a point of no return. They needed a special merit to be able to extricate themselves from that situation, and it's only because they did something which was against the grain, although they were slighting their father. But nevertheless, they did the right thing to acknowledge Moshe for who he was. In the merit of that, they merited to do tshuva. But if they wouldn't have stood for Moshe, as Moshe came and whatever he represented, they wouldn't have done tshuva. Because they already passed a certain point of no return, you're not coming back. Because it was so extreme what they had done. It's only because what they had done, which was against the grain, something which it goes beyond what one expects a person to do, they merit to do tshuva. There's a Tosis in Zvachim. There's a concept by Korbanos that's called dichui. That a korban, if it's consecrated, is a question, but once the Kohen is doing the service, he slaughters the korban, and before he finishes the ritual of Zrika, something interferes that he's not able to continue with the service. For instance, let's say the Mizbeach is chipped. If the Mizbeach is chipped, the stone on the Mizbeach is chipped, one cannot officiate. At that moment, because the korban cannot be brought on that mizbeach, because it's a damaged mizbeach. So let's say he slaughtered, he already received the blood, and now the mizbeach gets damaged, and they repair the mizbeach. Could he afterwards continue, and still during the daytime, could he continue? The answer is he's not able to continue. Why? It's called dichuy. That because since in the middle of the service there was an interruption, and because of that interruption, once it's interrupted, you can't continue. You have to start all over again. You have to bring another animal, another consecrated animal, do the slaughtering and do it over. Because that's called dichuy. It's been interrupted, pushed aside. Once it's pushed aside, it's put on hold, it doesn't come back. So, but the Gemara says, what's the halacha if the Kohen receives the blood in the ministry vessel and accidentally spills out, and the blood goes into a depression in the Azorah, in the sanctuary, and immediately he's able to scoop it up. He's able to scoop it up. So the Gemara says, in that case, it's not dichuy. That since whatever happened, he's able to pick up immediately without any hesitation, that interruption is not considered an interruption, because that's biyodo, because it can be corrected immediately. So Tosas has a question. The halacha is this: person eats chaylev, so he's inadvertently he has to bring a chatos, and then after he eats, he consecrates the chatos. He becomes a heretic. So the halacha is he becomes a heretic. There's a posuk that says that although it was consecrated at the time that he was qualified to bring it, a heretic is not able to bring a korban. And then afterwards, he does tshuva. He does tshuva. The halacha is, the Gemara says that once the korban, the animal was disqualified because he was a heretic, although he did tshuva, it's not reinstated, the animal. So Tosas asks a question, just as when the blood spilled on the floor, since he's able to scoop it up without hesitation, it's not considered interruption. So after he became heretic, he's able to do tshuva. It's biyodo, it's within his ability to do tshuva. So since it's within his ability to do tshuva immediately, it should not be considered interruption. So why is it disqualified? Even after he does tshuva. That's Tosas' question in Zohar. So Tosas answers, when it comes to tshuva, it's not so simple. It's not biyodo. You need tremendous amount of effort and schus and merit to come to a level of clarity to make that difference, to do tshuva. The blood spills out immediately and it went into a depression. Since you could scoop it up immediately, that interruption is not because you have control of that situation. When it comes to tshuva, it's not simple. When you bog down in that state of mind, whatever it is, to come back is not so simple. Therefore, the korban is disqualified. So I'm saying, but if they Korach, especially with them, they were so entrenched with their father, and here to be able to pull themselves out, it wasn't so simple. And they crossed lines, which was participating with this group, and to be able to extricate themselves, they were goners. But because they stood for Moshe Rabbeinu, there was special divine intervention which allowed them to have stirrings of tshuva in their heart, and because of that, they did tshuva. Which tells us in Pirkei Avos, don't pass judgment on your fellow unless you're standing in his shoes. You never know what the other person's predicament is. You never know. It may be easy for you, but it's not so simple for the other person. And we have many questions. He should do it differently. He should be better. Do you know what his demons are? You don't even know what he's dealing with. As a result of that, don't be so quick to pass judgment on someone else. The answer is exactly what we're saying. To be able to make changes in your life, you need special siyata d'shmaya. When it comes to tshuva and do things better, it's not so simple. Therefore, as a result of that, maybe he doesn't have the schus. You have the schus. For whatever reason. For you, it's easier. For him, it's more difficult. You want to assist him to do the right thing, assist him to do the right thing. But don't judge him that he is whatever he may be, because his situation may be different than your situation. First, he tells us in Brochus that a person should always live in the community where his Rebbe is. Why? That's only if you're going to listen to the rebuke or the Musar of your Rebbe. You should live in this community. Why? Because if that is the case, although under normal circumstances you would justify doing the wrong thing, but if your Rebbe is in the community and he's aware of what you're doing, you're not going to do the wrong thing. So offense to behavior is you should be in the community with your Rebbe. That will prevent you from crossing lines that normally you would justify to cross. So the Gemara says, where do we see this? Because we find Shlomo Melech, he married Bas Paro. He married, of course, she converted, whatever. The Rambam speaks about what the quality of the conversion was. And when he married Bas Paro, it was disastrous for Klal Yisrael. But when did he marry Bas Paro? After his Rebbe passed away. As long as his Rebbe was alive, he did not marry Bas Paro. When he passed away, he married Bas Paro. So you see that, and he did the wrong thing. So you see how important it is to be in the community where your Rebbe is, because as long as your Rebbe is there, he'll prevent you from crossing certain lines. So I ask the question. Shlomo Melech, he believed and he was convinced marrying Bas Paro was not a problem. So if his Rebbe would say to him, Shlomo, you're doing the wrong thing, he would explain to his Rebbe why it's the right thing. Shlomo Melech is Chacham Mikol Adam. He's the wisest man ever lived. He'd be able to convince his Rebbe that he's right. So why did he wait till his Rebbe passed away to marry Bas Paro? So what I once explained, that although Shlomo will explain to his Rebbe why he's right, and his Rebbe may not be able to respond to Shlomo's proof, convincing argument, but Shlomo knows if his Rebbe feels it's wrong, it's wrong. Although I can't respond to point out the fallacy in your justification. And Shlomo knew this. So once his Rebbe was no longer alive, if nobody there represents something which is contrary to what my decision is, I can live with my conscience. Therefore, Shlomo Melech married Bas Paro for that reason. So you see, a person, when you're in a certain position and you want to do something, we delude ourselves in the way we're convinced, but if something else is in the place there, because there he didn't yet cross the line. But once you cross the line, to come back, to save face, you're not coming back so quick. There you need special siyata d'shmaya to be able to see it right, to be able to do the tshuva. Okay, Parshas Korach Terzayin Yud Beis. Vayishloch Moshe likro ledosen ba'aviram b'nei Eliov. Moshe sent, the morning said, having sent an agent of the court to call dosen aviram. He subpoenaed them to come. V'yomru lo na'aleh. They said, we're not coming up. That's the word they used. We're not ascending. So Rashi says, V'yishlach Moshe mikan shem yachzikim v'machlokas. From here we learn that as much as there's such history with these two characters, with Doslav Aviram, they were a bone of contention which caused initially Moshe to flee from Egypt. He fled because they informed on him that he killed the Egyptian. And all the various issues when he came back, Moshe, they were always a bone of contention. It was always Doslav Aviram. So they had such a negative record with Moshe Rabbeinu. Now they're party to this mutiny, which is Achil Hashem. Moshe says, nevertheless, I'm going to summon them. I'm just not going to drop the boom on them. So here we see that you don't participate in machlokas. Any way you could somehow diffuse it, you diffuse it. Moshe left no stone unturned to establish some kind of rational relationship with them, peaceful relationship, that they should have an understanding and they shouldn't go forward with this mutiny. They said, lo na'aleh. Pia mechshilam. Sometimes a person makes expresses itself a certain way, which is a confirmation of what's going to happen. Shalem Yerido. Shalem Elo Yerido. We will not ascend. That means what they said was you're only going, but they're ready, like saying we're only going down on this one. We're going down, we're not coming up. Words have a lot of truth to them, and sometimes a person says certain words, not understanding what the ramifications or the connotation of those words are. Now, listen what he said. You took us up from a land that flows with milk and honey. Hear this, in Egypt. Egypt is a land that flows with milk and honey, that we should die in the desert because of the Meraglim. Makis story. Do you think you're going to lord over us? No way. Af loel eretz zovos chol hevi. You told us you're going to bring us to a land of milk and honey. You took us from a land of milk and honey. You told us you'd take us to a land of milk and honey, but you did not. You told originally give us a portion, field with vineyards. The eyes of these people should be gouged out. Meaning, even if you gouge out our eyes, we're not coming up. We're not coming, we will not listen to you under any circumstance. So Rashi says, even if you send someone to gouge out our eyes, we're not coming. Now, where are they coming from? The Jews were slaves in Egypt. We were killed, we were tortured if we didn't meet the quotas. And he says to Moshe Rabbeinu, you know what you did to us? You took us out of land of milk and honey. And the only reason why it was acceptable because you promised there's going to be something even better than that, or minimally equivalent to that. At the end, it's a disaster. We're all going to die. He took us in the desert to die. Therefore, they're livid at him, and they will not even look at him. You tell me. Here we talk about with slaves in Egypt, bondage. It says what he speaks about Avodas Perech, how they afflicted us and how they tortured us and how we were overwhelmed and this and that. And they speak about Egypt being a land of milk and honey. You understand what this is? It's like, God forbid, being in Auschwitz and say, this is great. This is the land of milk and honey. I mean, how can they even depict it or see it and see through that lens? Now, why was Aviram initially able to inform on Moshe Rabbeinu when he killed the Egyptian? Because even within the slave class in Egypt, there were Jews that were very wealthy. Aviram were very wealthy, and therefore they were not subject to the bondage in the physical sense like everyone else was. And because they were very wealthy, they had relationships in the government that they were able to inform on Moshe Rabbeinu after he killed the Egyptian. Moshe being in Midian for many years, Hashem comes to him and says, Mesu Anoshim. You could go back because those people who originally informed on you wanted to take your life. They passed, they died. Someone asked a question in the Dorim. They're still alive. From here, the takeaway is Ani Choshev Nes, that a person who's impoverished, he's like a dead person. Therefore, their connections with the government, the upper echelons, is no longer there. Therefore, you have nothing to worry about them. Nothing to worry. So what? What was their position in Egypt? Were they tortured? Did they suffer? Were they experience whatever the other Jews did? No. They were part of the wealthy class, and they lived, despite whatever was going around them in their own lives, they lived in their own cocoon, so to say. As a result of that, to them, you took us out of the land of milk and honey to what? To die in the desert. But what does it say about Dustin Aviram? What kind of Jew are you? You don't feel for your brothers. Your brothers have been tortured and killed, but because you're in the upper echelon, have relationships, you could even refer to it as land of milk and honey, but that's what doesn't have Viram are. Now they're showing their true colors, what they're all about. So why are they so they're going mad from this? They lost all their wealth. All of a sudden now they're leaving Egypt with tremendous wealth. Every Jew left with 10 pack out animals laden with gold and silver. Wealth, tremendous wealth. And what happens? So the dream is when they get back to the promised land, Eretz Yisrael, being of special pedigree because they're the children of the Bechor of Yaakov, they're going to flex the muscle again. We're going to have land, and we're going to have vineyards, and we're going to have estates, and we're going to be again in a position of power. All of a sudden now they realize this dream they had to be reinstated and get to the point where they're going to dictate and dominate their fellow brothers. It's not happening. They're going to die in the desert. Therefore, they went mad. They went berserk. Moshe, here we were waiting for this moment. You promised us. That's why we left. Why did they leave Egypt? Dozen of them left Egypt. Why did they leave Egypt? 80% died during the days of darkness. They left. You know why they left? Because they were convinced that ultimately they're going to go to the promised land and they have wealth. They have tremendous wealth. This is their dream. They're going to be back in the saddle, controlling the Jewish people because of their pedigree and because of the power they have. That's why they left. That was the overriding factor. The other Jews, they said, we're going to be together with the rest of them. Before we were schnooks, we're going to continue being schnooks. That's it. We're going to be back in the saddle. All of a sudden now they realize the whole thing was a pipe dream. Moshe, you misled us. We're going nowhere. You can't eat gold in the dead. What am I going to do with all this gold? You can't take it to the grave with you. Therefore, they were livid and berserk, and they related to Moshe Rabbeinu, who says, even if you gouge out our eyes, it's not worth living in terms of what you've done to us. They didn't leave. Why did they leave? Because they said, well, we're going to a desert. They didn't have the faith. They didn't have the trust. The 20% had the trust. Even though they had no provisions, they went into the desert because they had faith in Hashem.
Right.
Okay? Somebody goes, and his whole dream is to succeed. And he's so consumed by this success story, and without that success, his life is not worth living. And he gets involved in a deal that he doesn't see the forest from the trees, and it's going to be a disaster. And anybody else who thinks rationally, they wouldn't get into this deal. But because he's so bent on succeeding, he doesn't see it. Because the overriding factor is, I want to succeed. Doesn't Viram believed, is God going to provide for us, something? It's worth taking the chance for this ultimate level of success. We believe Moshe Rabbeinu. Could we tolerate him? The answer is no. But someday we're going to be back on top. Because here we have the wealth. But what about the desert? Something? I'm not going to worry about this now. Or I believe I'm going to arrive where I want to arrive. So that was the driving characteristic in these two people. Therefore, they left. So the faith wasn't because they had faith. The faith had because they were so consumed with getting back to the power and to dictate as originally they did. And that's why they were able to form a Moshe Rabbeinu. That somehow blotted out the worry of what's going to be in the desert. We don't worry about that right now. Oh, there's no.
Apostle?
It's the Orach Chaim on this on Dasan Aviram. He points out that if not for Dasan Aviram, even though Korach's wife instigated the whole thing, but he still needed a certain degree of support. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gone through with it. Who are the two people who gave him the support? Dasan Aviram. Because they were so bent, they had such envy and such hate for Moshe Rabbeinu. Because here they were in the position of power, and that's the reason why they informed on him originally. Although it was unconscionable what they originally did. The only advocate we had in the palace was Moshe Rabbeinu. He was a Jew. And you look in the Midrash, he was the favorite grandson of Paro. So how do you inform on this man to take his life? We understand the value versus your brothers. How do you do such a thing? That was a confirmation of who these people were. But now we see it. They saw Egypt, Eretz Zovos full of Dvosh. All of a sudden, you have this little kid coming up, and they said, who do you think you are? You're going to judge? How did you take the life of this Egyptian? You're a young whippersnapper. How do you do these things? Even if meant they're going to inform on him, and his life's going to be taken, and the advocate for the Jewish people is no longer going to be there in the palace. To them, they weren't concerned about that. How could you not be concerned? If you have any degree of feeling, how could you not be concerned for your fellow brothers? The answer is Eretz Zovos full of Dvosh. They lived in their own vacuum, and that was it. Klal Yisrael didn't exist. That's who they were. And he says, the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, not what I'm just telling you, no. If not, so it's interesting. Dazavir were kept alive when Hashem says Mesu. He actually caused them to lose their wealth, so they no longer had the status. He didn't take them out. He could have caused them to die. If they would have died, this whole story with Korach would have never happened. Because Korach needed the backing of Daznavirim, who was represented as evil, to give him that support. Otherwise, he would have never gotten through the front door. Korach, it would have just died. It would have died. It would have been dead in the water initially. So Hashem again orchestrates the scenario that ultimately, as I said, to prove the conclusion, Moshe Emes, Torah Emes, it wasn't enough Korach should be who he was and he should have the wealth. He still needed the support of these two people to be able to launch that mutiny and nearly succeed, and finally was put to rest and destroyed by the earth opening its mouth and swallowing them up.